Hello, hello, hello. Hi, everybody. It's me, Dr. Cindy, and I am here on this blessed Wednesday afternoon with my very special guest, and I can't wait to start talking to you about everything having to do with health and wellness for the patient who's trying to conceive. Guys, so much has been going on. I hope you guys are doing well. It's been a crazy month. October seems to have flown by, and so I hope you guys are doing as well as I feel you should be doing. Today I have joining with me in studio Dr. Carol. Dr. Carol is a PhD trained reproductive biologist and embryologist who also is an innovator in the field of reproductive endocrinology and infertility. She's not only an innovator, but she's someone who likes to share her innovations. And it certainly led to her creating an app which is now widely used within the industry and one we'll talk about today. Dr. Carol is also one of our early submissions for guest blogs on the Dr. Cindy Duke website. And so today we're here to talk about her guest blog. We're here to answer questions as it relates to fertility and trying to conceive. Certainly, you're welcome to join us by posting your questions in the comments, and Dr. Carol and I will answer them here today. In addition, as you guys know, the American Society for Reproductive Medicine recently held its annual conference, the virtual Congress, because this year it was held virtually. And so Dr. Carol and I are also going to talk all about our takeaways from that conference, where we see the future of this field going. And for those of you who are listening, who are interested in the field, who are interested in infertility and maybe the laboratory side in particular, Dr. Carol and I are going to talk about that, particularly the future for women in the field. And so without any further delay, help me welcome Dr. Carol Lynn here today. Hello, Carol.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for making the time to join us today. And, I know last week was so busy for you, so I imagine we've got so much to cover. But for the little boys and girls who are out there listening, who've never really heard much about embryology or reproductive biology, tell us briefly, who are you and what do you do?
Yes, this is a great question. Most people don't know what an embryologist is, and that's probably luckily because they haven't experienced infertility. But nowadays, there are so many assisted reproductive technology products that are aimed at a whole host of people. So LGBTQ people trying to build their family through third-party reproduction, young women who want to freeze their eggs and develop their careers first and have families later in life, even young men that want to freeze sperm early in life and potentially avoid some of those pitfalls with reproducing with older sperm. And, even just people who want to have more control over their family building, like the order of the sex, the gender that they have their children, right? So there's just so many ways that we help people build families now in the lab. So I am a clinical embryologist, and I got my training in reproductive physiology from the University of Connecticut.
Woo, UConn!
At UConn, the University of Connecticut is more known for its Lady Husky ball players than female scientists, but we're trying to change that perception. So we excel in sports and in STEM there. Very luckily, Connecticut's one of those places where there's a saying that the men are men and the women are champions. Right? So I grew up in an environment that really expected me to excel, and I always gravitated towards science. So the interesting thing for me is that I was in research for 15 years before I moved into the clinical side of medicine. And it's the clinical side is so fascinating to me because it's really where the rubber meets the road. Yes. We translate these discoveries from the research lab almost directly into clinical practice, where they can have a huge impact on people and people's family building. So, for example, pre-implantation genetic testing is one of those things that jumped very quickly from a research lab straight into the clinic. Of course, clinical trials have caught up with that.
Yes.
And recently, which we're going to talk about when we talk about our takeaways from ASRM, I'm sure. But another example of a research protocol that jumped straight from the lab into the clinic and started having immediate impact and really changed the field is the use of intracytoplasmic sperm injection.
Yeah.
So as opposed to conventional IVF, where you just put a bunch of sperm and eggs together in a dish and hope that everything fertilizes.
Right.
So a clinical embryologist, we have such an interesting job. We literally are choosing the DNA that is going to go together to make somebody's family.
True.
It is the biggest honor of my life to sit at the microscope and select the best sperm and really perform a microsurgery where I'm injecting one cell into another and then follow those babies and culture them through the 7 days that they're in our labs. And when I go to freeze the embryos at the end of a cycle, I really feel like I'm putting people's own babies to bed until their mothers can come back and pick them up again.
Yes.
Yes. And another really one of my absolute favorite moments is the FERT check. Because that is the time when we see the paternal genome and the maternal genome still separate inside the cell. It's literally the moment before conception before the embryo has its own genome. And so those moments to me are just so magical, and you really cannot compare it with anything else. The responsibility and the gravity of what we do to help build people's families, and I really turned also to the clinical side after I became pregnant with my own miracle baby and realized that, number one, I needed a bit of a career change in order to justify to myself leaving my miracle baby every day for, and then also because I wanted to bring that power to, as many people as possible of family building. Yeah.
And it's a truly powerful and fulfilling job. You really are describing what I like to tell my staff at the clinic, one of the most meticulous jobs in the world. Because you guys have to be sure about every step as you go through it. You have to be sure you guys triple, quadruple, quintuple everything. It's important.
Yeah, and there's a saying, measure twice, cut once, and there's no truer place than the embryology lab for that. There is no room for mistakes. And, we are human and errors happen, but we strive for 100% accuracy.
Correct.
And whenever there is a mistake, I prefer it to be in a place like, note-taking or transcribing data, or, we cannot ever have any mistakes with gametes, embryos, eggs,
Correct.
Genetics. It just can't happen. The stakes are so high.
Amongst patients who are out there is, oh my God, what if they mix things up? What if they get the wrong sperm? That's a common question. And, I like to encourage patients to understand that there are so many checkpoints involved that it's near impossible for that to happen because of how many checkpoints and how many people have to check and double check each other as well.
Yeah. And sometimes we talk about how do you pick an IVF lab that is investing back into its lab and into the technology. And we have these systems now called electronic witnessing systems.
Yeah.
So in the old style of witnessing, you have to have two people and visualize the patient's name, date of birth, and medical record number on the dish every time that you move cells around. But there are flaws in that system. Sometimes two embryologists can't always be in the lab at the same time. Maybe labels can get mixed up, things can happen. So with the electronic witnessing systems that have come out now, that has been very powerful, not only in helping to reduce those kind of errors, but also in helping us to document for ourselves so we can sleep at night that we know the procedures that day were performed with the appropriate gametes together. So
And you're talking about the system where barcodes are now used. So
that's right.
barcodes are created and they stay with every aspect of that patient's laboratory journey from start to finish.
Barcodes, radio frequency ID tags, QR codes. There's a whole bunch of things now. And that technology in and of itself is still evolving and getting better and is brand new, really. I mean, it's come out within the last, 5 years or so that,
So, one of the unique things, you guys are in the laboratory, you're sort of seeing the end of a big part of a patient's fertility journey. And for a lot of patients, their hang up is, how can I help the embryologist get the best results for me? And indeed, your skill set is identifying the eggs, injecting that egg with the sperm when ICSI is performed, growing those or culturing those embryos in the laboratory. If we're going to be doing testing on them, knowing how and when to sample the cells for testing. But what can the patient do in their everyday life? Maybe the patient who's watching now, who's like, how can I help Dr. Carol in the lab? What can I, the person with the eggs, do? Or what can a person with the sperm do? What can they do?
It's a great question. And, there is a lot that they can do and good ways to take control of your journey. And I totally understand this particular anxiety because the patient does so much up until the point of the retrieval. And then they wheeled into the OR, they get put under, and it's like they never, they're never going to see their precious eggs and sperm and tissues again until hopefully they're bringing home a live, healthy baby, right?
Yes.
So the lab is a literal, figurative, and metaphorical black box. Typically, a windowless room. The doors are very heavily guarded with keys and codes. It's humid, it's warm, it's dark. We're mimicking the environment of a human fallopian tube, which is the site of fertilization of embryos in your body, if it were to happen in your body. So, one of the things I think patients can do is we cannot really increase the quality of the eggs or sperm once it gets into the lab. And understanding the egg cycle and how a follicle cohort is recruited 180 days ago. So we're talking about months that you have to prepare. Your first cycle might not even be your best cycle. It might be your second cycle or your third. And also, I know a lot of people worry about the number of eggs, but the way that we think about it is we worry about the quality. So for us, the fewer eggs, the higher quality, the better. We don't want a ton of eggs that are low quality. And so really, I think what patients can do is this holds true for both, the sperm provider and the egg provider, to really focus on the 3 months before increasing the quality of the gametes. And you do that by avoiding toxins, avoiding cigarette smoke, avoiding alcohol, lowering your body weight by 5 to 10%, really avoiding refined carbohydrates, which has been shown over and over again to reduce the quality of IVF cycles and gametes. And also, getting regular exercise, plenty of sleep, taking your folic acid, taking your coenzyme Q10 and your vitamin D. Those are the 3 supplements that have the strongest evidence out there. And so, it's going to be buying good supplements, talking to your doctor about it. A lot of supplements are made in countries that don't have very good regulation of the final product. So really having high quality supplements that have been recommended and talking to your doctor about it. So that's one of the things. Another thing we think about with sperm is something called DFI. Fragmentation index.
So let's repeat that for those who are listening, because people are now getting hip to that term, but it really does make a difference.
Yeah. So when the DNA, so let me start at the beginning. The sperm actually are in the testes for a long, long time before they're ejaculated. And
another thing that blows people's minds, whenever I tell them it takes 70 days at least to get sperm that's ejaculated. People are just like, really?
Yes, and that sperm can spend months in the epididymis before it gets ejaculated. So controlling the environment of the testes is really important, because sperm are these like little missiles of DNA. There is nothing in the head of the sperm except for the enzymes that help it break into the egg and this DNA that has been packaged up into the tightest package possible. I mean, you think about sperm and egg, they're both one cell, but the sperm is only about 6 microns, whereas the egg is about 100 microns. So you're talking about the sperm has eliminated everything that cells use to keep it healthy. So it has, whenever there's reactive oxygen species or, a high temperature environment, that is going to cause DNA fragmentation. And the sperm doesn't have the mechanism to repair the DNA. The sperm stem cell does, but the sperm is not going to have those mechanisms. So you want to really, I think all those professions where men get very hot and have to wear a lot of equipment or a lot of protective clothing, and really are impacted by environmental stress. And plus, there's a lot of THC use these days. And, people are there, and I mean, those are things that we do, right? But let's take the 3 months before our retrieval to, if you're a man, you want to ejaculate every few days and get fresh sperm up. And, sperm, it's kind of interesting with sperm because you have millions of them, and many of them are set to undergo an apoptotic programmed cell death.
True.
So in the lab, part of what we do is we clean all of those dead sperm out of there, we purify it, and we get it down to just the very motile, like the best swimmers. And then we're looking to pick the most, beautiful one morphologically with our very high-powered microscope. So really kind of getting us the best gametes, that's like step number 1.
True.
So, and then, like I said, step number 2 is going to be the environment that the embryo is going to go back into. So, for the stimulations, there has been a lot of focus on making that very specific to the patient. The medications are tailored, follicles are monitored every few days, probably every 2 days or every 1 or 2 days. And the dosages are really tinkered with, and there's different stim cocktails, and it's really individualized to the patient. But one of the things that's still sort of the same for every patient is the length of progesterone treatment to prep the endometrium to get the embryo back. Correct. So one of the things that people might want to look into, particularly if there has been repeated implantation failure with chromosomally normal euploid embryos, is getting an ERA test or a BCL6 test to see if there's any sub-level endometriotitis or endometriosis, and to make sure that the endometrium itself is at the same stage as the embryo that we're going to be transferring back into the uterus.
And that's really important. Yeah. And it's a big advancement in our field compared to even 10, 15 years ago, where you're correct. We have spent a lot of time focusing on stimulation. How do we prepare the ovaries to give us maximum quantity of eggs, and with more recent focus on the quality of the eggs coming out as well. But we're still working on figuring out the uterine factor, which is the womb factor, and so you're correct, because we know that maybe only about 65% or so of patients will have successful implantation at our usual implantation time point in terms of progesterone preparation, which is like 5 days. But I am so surprised. The more patients I have who do the endometrial receptivity assay, where we're discovering that they're falling way outside 45-day window. I have patients who are as far out as 7 days. There's no way we would have figured that out on our own without that test.
It's amazing.
It's amazing. And I really think it's part of the answer, but you're right. And of course, I'm biased. I'm a virologist and an immunologist, but I definitely think there's a bigger role for our immunology and some of our virus friends in terms of what they've been doing at the level of the endometrium as well.
Yeah. So I think that's one of the other interesting findings that's come out of the scientific labs recently is that the uterus has, being a continuous epithelium with the outside world, has its own microbiome, right? So that's exciting findings.
Yeah. And for so long, for those who are listening, for a very long time, the dogma, the thought was that the uterine lining is this really sterile place that is not really exposed to anything that could cause infection or overgrow, such that we call endometritis inflammation or certain infections, bacterial infections predominantly, the sources of inflammation. But now we're discovering that the endometrium has its own microbiome, just like our gut, intestines, mouth have their own microbiome, which is a combination of bacteria and viral type particles and immune system. The uterine lining has the same.
Yeah. And if you think about what does bacteria do sometimes in our gut, some of the bacteria that we have produce vitamins, some produce lactase, some produce sugars. Bacteria really help our bodies to function properly in a lot of cases. Some bacteria are probably even contributing to the matrix proteins that are in the uterus. So it's really exciting and a totally emergent field. Like there's, if there's any young women listening out there who are thinking like, what do they want their research project to be? Do they want to be a scientist? Do they want to go into fertility medicine or fertility research? That field is like ripe for the picking.
It's the new frontier. We've
and personalized medicine.
Exactly. We've gotten very far with eggs, with sperm. We've gotten very far now with the gut, with the brain, and figuring out a lot of things. But we're now realizing, as most people already know, the human body is very complex. And the human body is really a combination of multiple universes. Think of ourselves as a galaxy. Each organ system is its own universe with multiple different planets and i.e. bacteria and other things playing a role. Just like how, if your vaginal bacteria goes out of whack, you have like bacterial vaginosis, odor, itching, etc. We're now understanding that more of that could be going on in the womb. And so, that's a part where so much more research is needed. We definitely need more people who are interested in that kind of stuff to get involved in the field. And yes, as you're going to hear pretty soon, Dr. Carol and I share another thing in common, which is encouraging young women to enter careers in STEM. And so we'll get to that. We'll definitely get to that. Well, that was so helpful, Dr. Carol. I mean, I think most of our audience, I keep seeing lots of people saying things like, never knew this. Kelly Stewart is saying, never knew this. We've got Lydia saying, very informative, And so, guys, I hope you guys are listening, sharing. You can share the replay of this as well to your friends, your family, those who may not necessarily be considering conception right now, but wondering how they can start preparing their bodies. And that brings me, Dr. Carol, to your blog, which was amazing. So it's titled 5 Health and Wellness Tips for the Person Who's Trying to Conceive. And you sort of touched on some of it just now for the laboratory, but you actually have some other very general health and wellness tips that, both the person with the egg and the person with sperm can use, but also the person who's going to be the carrier can also use without giving away the entire blog, because guys, you can go visit the blog, and I encourage you to go to the link that's scrolling on the bottom and check out Dr. Carol's blogs, leave her a comment, leave her some kudos, and really share it with friends and family who need to know this stuff. So Dr. Carol, in the blog, you actually talk more about environmental toxins. And tell me why that matters. Why should we care about environmental toxins?
Yeah. So first, I want to say that obviously health and wellness is a little bit outside of my area of specialty, but I felt like I wanted to talk about some of these things because particularly right now during this time, I think me and a lot of people I know are feeling very powerless. And we're sitting around at home and we're reading now more than ever because we're plunked down in front of that screen for God knows how many hours a day. And so I really just wanted to give some actionable tips to help bring up, people's hope and spirit in this time. So, the environmental factors are a big thing. A lot of us live in places, we live near highways. We live under the flight path of airports. I know when I lived in San Diego, there was constantly jets going overhead, and we know that we were having spent jet fuel all around us in our environment there. Yeah. We're touching these things during our day, during our week. We're making our lunches, we're putting our food into plastic. There's been a lot of studies done in the nutrition sector about when you control for everything else in a person's diet, that food that has been touching or packaged in plastic causes more weight gain than its counterpart that has never touched plastic.
Correct.
So we just know that there are things that we can take control of and reduce in our environment. So using some free products, trying to reduce your BPA exposure, but also being mindful that just because there's no BPA doesn't mean that they haven't replaced it with something that is very close to BPA.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's so important for people to know because on the one hand, plastic revolutionized the world and it certainly allowed people to become more independent and less connected to the kitchen. So for women, for example, we all know our family members who were the result of the Tupperware era and the Tupperware party and et cetera. And by the way, specific anything against Tupperware, the brand, is an example.
Yeah.
But, we learned that plastics do have all these different chemicals, which when they enter a biological system like our human bodies can disrupt our hormones and our chemicals.
Yeah.
And negatively, especially so.
Right. And, the thing about human cells is there's this kind of lock and key mechanism. Mm-hmm. So there's the keys, the locks which sit in the cell membrane, and then all of the chemicals in the whole world, whether there are chemicals naturally made in our body, I'm talking about hormones here or enzymes, or whether they're chemicals that are coming from the outside, they fit like a key into those locks. So the chemicals, some of them that are coming from these plastics and from our environment, really mimic those keys, and then they're blocking the hormone receptors or disrupting them in some way. And it's you look at products, read the labels, and overall try to reduce. So don't get crazy about everything. I mean, I see people really
you walk around with your food in your hand.
Yeah. And you know what I did? I went to the antique mall and I got those old-fashioned glass
the Corningware and ceramic
to store our food in. And so when it's sitting in the fridge now, the leftovers, it's going to be in a glass container. So that just reduces it just a little bit. Yeah.
So what I tell my patients, and I'm telling patients this based on also what I call actionable observations, which is I have patients, I can think of 2 right now who we recently discharged pregnant. So they're now in their second trimester, but both of them initially did egg retrievals about a year and a half ago. And we were struggling, just poor egg quality, poor pregnancy outcomes, despite everything we're doing. So I remember sitting down and one of my patients said, Dr. Duke, I'm going to spend the next 6 months really getting my life together. I want to know what I can do. So I said, well, while there's no evidence that this will definitely guarantee your results, I would recommend no longer storing foods in plastic as much as you can avoid it, using glass or ceramic instead. I said if you have to microwave your foods, microwave in glass or ceramic. If you have to store food in plastic, make sure the food is cold before you transfer it.
That's a good tip.
Plastic. Absolutely, because many people nowadays, we're into the meal prep era. And so the whole goal is, most people think you cook and you drop the hot stuff in the plastic container, seal it, put it in the fridge. But that's how things can leach out over time. And we're not talking about using plastic just once, guys. We mean over our entire lifetimes, these things have probably been building up in our bodies. Similarly, for all of us who love the non-stick cooking pots. And now we're learning that
Was me.
Yes, the ingredients to line the pots for nonstick cooking also over time can leach out chemicals which disrupt our endocrine or hormonal system, or what we call endocrine disruptors. So it's really important, guys, for general health. So, back to my story, this patient did all that. She cut out, she went organic, she cut out foods that were involving antibiotic use in the animals, she cut out the unfermented soy products. She went gung-ho at it. And she came back. We did another egg retrieval cycle. The egg number was the same, no different, but this time she and her husband were the ones who did these modifications. They ended up with 8 embryos that were euploid, great quality, and now they're pregnant and discharged. Another patient did the same thing. She had endometriosis, chronic pelvic pain, and I said, I want you to do everything I'm going to do medically, but I want your help at home, which is I want you to start looking for foods that are your triggers. My big thing, I tell everybody, I use bread as an example. If you were to bake your own bread at home, you're probably putting no more than 5 ingredients into your homemade bread, no more than 5. Yet, if you were to purchase a packet of bread, you're typically reading just a plethora of ingredients, including names that don't look like they occur in nature.
Yes.
And I really think, unless you're in a situation where this is the only way you can access something like that, you should definitely choose, whenever you can, options that are natural, options that are less embellished, so to speak. And you'd actually see benefits with your own general health, not just fertility, but your heart health. We know now that a lot of these chemicals, they need some place to build up, right? They have to be stored somewhere. So like you said, they're being stored in the cell membranes of your heart cells, cell membranes of your brain cells, cell membranes of, the pancreas, the place where your hormonal messages have to come for sugar metabolism. So this is all really, really important information, plus weight loss, like Dr. Carol said. And, we're not talking dramatic weight loss. Notice she said 5 to 10% of your body weight, meaning if you weigh 200 pounds, she's talking about 10 to 20 pound weight loss. Just keep that in mind, guys. And so, yes, I concur and I agree. If you want to hear more, because there's even more than what Dr. Carol and I just talked about, check out this blog, guys. It's scrolling at the bottom. Go check it out. So, Dr. Carol, this brings me now to our next favorite topic, which is ASRM. And that was the big conference that we set our calendars to every year. That we schedule is based around ASRM, especially if we're involved in research. We're also timing our research so that we can get that big finding ready for presentation the following year. How did you like ASRM this year? I have to say it felt different with it being virtual.
Of course it felt different. I missed the in-person interactions and, so much of the collegial nature of research is being in the room together and talking and coming up with ideas and just meeting new people to actually execute those ideas with, and seeing what other people are bringing to the table, and just soaking up the zeitgeist of the times. But, everyone is doing the best they can in our new normal. And I thought ASRM did a fantastic job of making it smooth. And also, there are some benefits to doing it this way. that now all of the talks, we can access them until December.
Yes.
With the posters, I could really pore over the scientific information and read them at my leisure. I think having some of the people that volunteered to do the, those sessions where they were there to meet other people, the meet and greet.
Yeah.
Well, I entered into a few of those, and I was able to access people who I don't think I normally ever would have been able to access because they were there online.
Yeah.
So I thought that was amazing. I mean, they would have been bombarded, and I was the 50th back in line.
It's a big meeting. Like normally 10,000 people converge. Just imagine 10,000 people pertaining to the field of reproductive endocrinology and infertility. And when I say pertaining to, it's literally that, because it's not just physicians, it's not the embryologists, it's everybody. It's marketing, it's the corporate side, it's the business side, it's research, it's journalists who are interested in
lawyers, legal, everyone who touches it.
We converge on some American city.
American city.
And it's a fun time because you're right. We get to meet people from across the world who are doing amazing things in the field, and you exchange ideas. You even also get to collaborate. I've actually literally sat at ASRM and come up with research ideas for the next year with someone whose research sparked my interest. And I realized we could actually do something together.
Yeah.
And so I miss a little bit of that. But on the other hand, you're right. I also noticed that I was able to access, meaning see and hear from people, who we consider to be the superstars in our field, where, access to them is usually limited. When you're in person, because they're so crowded and everybody's lining up to meet them. Here, there was more of a chance for them to see your question.
That's right.
Your comment.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I really, really like that. Of course, one other thing that came out of ASRM this year, Dr. Carol, I don't know if you know, is there's a new special interest group for ASRM, and it's the social media interest group. So for those who are listening, yes, as a field, we have been doing more in terms of getting awareness out there about infertility coming from people within the field across social media. And, we have leaders and trailblazers like Dr. Natalie Crawford, Dr. Rui Jelani, Dr. Serena Chen. Many would say me as well.
Yeah.
And we've been out there doing our thing for the past 3.5 years. I would say actually 4.5 to 5 years for some of us. And what we now finally have is recognition from ASRM that social media is a majorly important aspect of information dissemination when it comes to our field. And as such, they actually recognize this enough that we now have founded an interest group, which are specialized groups within the society that will then put out information, directives, and even patient documentation, and also training for other physicians on how to use it. So I'm really pleased we now have that interest group. I'm one of the founding members. I think on paper, I'm the treasurer, I think. That was one of the other big cool things that came out of ASRM.
So I want to talk about special interest groups, because that was one of my things that in not only the social media interest group, but also the diversity and inclusion special interest group. Mm-hmm. So I think that ASRM, as a society, has really taken some steps into the diversity and inclusion arena. And I noticed, a lot more talks focused on that this year. And they were, I'm just so thrilled with this. I recently wrote, a very long form article. I hope people actually got to the end of it, where I finally talk about infertility medicine. But I wrote an article called Black Mamas Matter.
Yes.
And we talk a lot about, I talk a lot about the history of medical, systemic, and structural racism. And, it starts a long way back, and there's a lot of layers to it. But what, the takeaway is that we're not doing good enough today.
We have way more to do, way more.
Yes.
I'm happy and pleased to see way more people talking about it, because you're right. So before this social media special interest group, I've long been involved with the diversity and inclusion group at ASRM. And, in hushed tones, we always joked that it was where you go to see the people of color at ASRM, because we were primarily the people who were members of it. And then you had white women there too, but very rarely did you see white men at that particular special interest group. We're being honest, right? If we saw men, they tended to be men from other countries and stuff, but not white. It's American men. And so I think one of the interesting things for this year, you're right, is I saw a lot more of them interested in wanting to hear.
Yeah.
SRM has also created a task force for the first time to actually look at the field of infertility and how we can do better when it comes to allowing and presenting access to patients across the spectrum.
Yes. And, I think that the men probably at first also weren't that interested in social media and probably didn't think that much of it or that it was ever going to be anything. And so it was also good to see a lot of the white men, at the social media special interest group as well.
Oh,
and
we
want their participation. We need their participation in all of these things, and they're impacted by it too. When you're a physician, I'm sure you can attest to this. Your pregnancy rates are very important to you. So to have the three major minority groups, Black, Asian, and Latino women, not doing as well as their Caucasian white counterparts, it's impacting your rates and the way that you practice medicine as a physician. And so
unfortunately, what happened for a long time is instead of looking into it and saying, let's fix it, a lot of practices, whether they knew it or not, instead just directed their marketing away from those groups so that they can keep their pregnancy rates high. And that's something I'm just so excited that leaders are talking about, including you, because let's talk about why you're a leader. I don't think many people know how unique you are to be a woman holding a PhD and being a clinical embryologist. The majority of clinical embryologists around the world are what?
Yes. So that is so true. And I don't know what to say about it, but I think it starts at the beginning of the STEM pipeline. Right. Just in general, there are less women getting PhDs and advanced degrees. Now, luckily in the biological sciences and in reproductive endocrinology and infertility medicine, it's catching up, and we're starting to get, at least half and half, and sometimes even more, probably 80% of the fellows are women now. Yes, but in the sciences, we still need more women, but especially women of color getting into PhD programs and obtaining advanced degrees. And then, even further, like how you get your clinical training and who accepts you into the program and is willing to train you, it's another huge bottleneck, I would say.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, I've heard, groups of all white embryologists before say things like, well, I just don't know if they would fit in.
Yes.
And, kind of like microaggressions.
It is. Because
I don't know if I understand their accent. I don't know if we would have anything to talk about. The lab is such a tight-knit group. We need to mesh, we need to, and what it sounds like to me is,
I'm sure this is the culture for them.
Yeah.
Sort of illusions. And you're right. And some people watching are probably saying, well, why are they talking about this publicly? We need to talk about it publicly because otherwise it's a taboo. And the first thing to let people know is it doesn't matter what your embryologist's skin color is. It's all about technique. It's all about their skill set in the lab. It has nothing to do with what accent they have. It has nothing to do with their country of origin. As a matter of fact, some of the earliest, greatest embryologists didn't sound or look like either of us. And it's true, but I think, you're right, because, for example, in terms of medical training, there are lots of things put in place to try to address issues of lack of diversity. But none of that is really existing on the PhD side of the track, especially when it comes to training, like you said, subspecialty training. You might get a PhD in biology, but if you decided now I want to work in a fertility clinic and a fertility lab,
yes,
that pathway is really still very much shrouded.
yes, yes.
Many times depends on who knows who.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that, I can attest to that as a woman in STEM.
Yeah.
That when you look at pardon me, for example, the number of women in high impact labs where the, male professor running the lab is a Nobel Prize winner. Like, let's just say, for example, they're taking in less women to train and even fewer women or people in general, people of color to train. So then you start off at a publication disadvantage because those names are not on your papers, and then you don't get the grants, and then you don't get into the labs, and then you don't form that web of collaborators that really helps to excel your career in science.
From a career advancement standpoint, you're held in sort of a holding pattern. You're put in that holding pattern without even realizing it's happened, right? Because for those who are listening, what Dr. Carroll just described, I think I had a post on Saturday talking about the catch-22 of not having enough money but needing to go to conferences. And it's just what she's describing here.
I read that post and I felt it.
I'm getting goosebumps because it popped up as a memory on my Facebook, and immediately I went back to that time because I remember that trip so vividly, in that I enjoyed it, but it was also a trip wherein it was like counting every penny, constantly checking for hotel rooms so I can make sure I can fly back to the East Coast. Just to explain to everyone who's listening too, because money was so tight. Although I lived in Baltimore, I drove all the way to Philadelphia so I could get the cheapest flight from Philadelphia to San Diego and back so I could make that conference. And that's because I knew how important it was to get my research heard, to present my data, to work on publications, which is what Dr. Carroll is talking about. Because if you're someone who has this dream and you're working hard toward it, but you're not working with the right people who, when people see their names on a paper, they're like, I trust this paper, I trust this work, to build your own credibility.
Yeah.
Your career is essentially in a holding pattern without you knowing it. Absolutely. And so that's where getting the right mentors like Dr. Carroll also comes in. And Dr. Carroll, I know you do a lot of work mentoring and doing outreach, but we also, because I don't want to lose time for us not to talk about it, you're also a huge innovator, which in the field of fertility is actually not that common when it comes to women in our field, right? Most of the innovations and the everything from an app to the money-making things are really still being led by men, which are the first generations of fertility specialists. Women are catching up, but you are definitely helping to lead that charge. Tell us about your app.
Yeah, so, okay. One of the special interest groups we didn't get to talk about was special interest. So how does a special interest group get formed, or how does it happen? You need to prove to ASRM 3 years in a row that 30 people or more are interested in this topic and that you can convene them 3 years in a row. And what we did this year, I was so lucky to be part of this group. I think I'm also the treasurer on paper, becoming a board member, a director on paper, is the the Artificial Intelligence Special Interest Group for ASRM. And so when I first started my clinical training in embryology, I was in an artificial intelligence focused embryology lab. And artificial intelligence is one of those things that is going to help us democratize medicine and help us to elevate that care. I think sometimes if you're a physician and you haven't seen a particular type of patient, if you can have an AI system that's looking at a big data set that's worldwide and bring to bear a lot of experiences,
Yes.
then you can possibly tailor the treatment to some of your patients of populations that you don't really do a lot of treatment on.
True.
So, artificial intelligence, it has so many applications in reproduction, everything from, urology and prostate cancer to pregnancy prediction and embryo selection and gamete, selection. And so how to pick the sperm for the egg.
Yeah.
And really just so many different applications. So this year was the first time that we convened our first 30-person or more body. So hopefully in 3 years, I'm going to be right there with you with our official ASRM special interest group, which will be so good. But when I did my, initial training in human clinical embryology, we were already thinking about artificial intelligence applications and how to develop them in the lab. And one of the things that I very quickly realized was there was no good way to collect experts' opinions on images and videos.
Yes.
The very first module inside of the app, we were thinking was going to be used to collect annotated data for artificial intelligence systems. But the other thing I learned as a very junior person on the rung was that embryology has this sort of long, slow arc of training, because it takes a long time, a lot of experience and knowledge combined to be able to make those clinical decisions that really impact a patient's cycle. So like what sperm to pick, or should I freeze this embryo, or how to biopsy this embryo?
Yeah.
And so what I realized with having the image management system and the senior level people answering what they thought was the answer to those images, you can give these to the junior trainees to help us kind of absorb that content knowledge and that knowledge from the seniors that takes 30 years to develop. So I was shocked that there wasn't better training except to sit at the elbow of a senior embryologist and try to absorb those 30 years of experience points from them. And of course, they're very busy, they don't have time.
If I may add, people, the reason why this is a big deal, there are parts of the world where assisted reproductive technology hasn't gotten there yet. They barely have labs. And one example would be the continent of Africa. We certainly have major metropolitan parts of Africa that have access to full fertility services. But there are also major places with huge population centers where they're also struggling with infertility, because mind you, infertility is a global disease. And yet the big issue that Dr. Carol is pointing out is if they were to send their brightest future embryologists to be trained, they have to come abroad and spend decades before they can take their technology back and their knowledge and confidence back. And so she's showing you how she can bridge even that divide.
Yeah, so I mentioned my app is called ART Compass. So ART, Assisted Reproductive Technologies. And we put the compass imagery because we just love that thought that this is helping to guide. And really the technology grew module by module. So that training and using images to train was the first module. But as I went through my own training progression, I started to see more and more areas inside the IVF lab where we had no digital solution. So we're still doing a lot of management of almost everything, from embryologist training to quality control of instruments to annual procedure evaluations to patient cycles on paper. And when all of that data is locked into paper, nobody has access to it. So it's kind of gets stuck in the lab, and then it has trouble going to different places. So you might scan a PDF into the EMR and the PDF goes to the physician, but the data points in it are not actionable. They're static.
To help advance the field either.
So nowadays, the Art Compass app and platform, it has a web-based backend now too. It is kind of a whole ecosystem, but it starts in the heart of the lab where, the laboratory, it's a laboratory information management system And it does a little bit of everything that you need. So quality control and assurance, which is so important for the IVF lab.
Correct.
But communicating the IVF lab results to the patient can hit a button and then communicate it. I'm sorry, the physician, and the physician can hit a button and communicate it to the patient side of the app. And the lab director has an app, all the technologists do, even the clinic administrators. So I'm sure almost every patient can feel this particular pain. Sometimes you might feel like not all of the people involved in your professional care are on the same page.
Yes.
The lab knows something different, that maybe the doctor doesn't know exactly how many embryos are in the cryo storage inventory, which is a horrible situation to have. We in the lab never want that to happen, but maybe the, results are coming from the PG testing company, and it's, we have to combine that with the results from inside the lab and then get that to the physician. And there was no good way to do any of this. So the app is like really a way for everybody to meet from the top of the clinic down on the same page regarding a patient's IVF cycles.
Yes.
So, I'm extremely proud of the work we've done, and we're a startup. We're growing. We launched our product right before COVID hit.
Yes.
So
it's already making waves. I mean, you are, first of all, you're bringing transparency, but you're also bringing actual efficiency to the process.
Absolutely. And I'm so proud to announce, maybe here publicly for the very first time, that we're going to be integrating our database with SART this year.
So SART, the Society of Assisted Reproductive Technology, which is sort of the governing body for laboratories in the United States. That's huge.
Yeah. Yes, and the patients know about SART because SART has their great campaign, Start with SART, and they provide all of the transparency about the clinic's data to the patients and, to everybody. So patients can know what the success rates of each cycle are. Reproduction is kind of a unique field that way. We are federally mandated to report our success metrics. I don't know of any other clinical subspecialty of medicine. Like, does a cardiologist have to report how many stents they put in and whether they were successful?
I don't know. But nothing that has to go publicly like ours.
Yes. So ours is the website and you download the packet, and every single clinic is in there. I'm sorry, not FDA, CDC website.
All right. You can go to the CDC and look up every clinic, and look up whether or not what we're saying is what we are actually producing. You can look at the nitty-gritty, so to speak, to look across different age groups. You can even look across ethnic groups for the most part now, because SART has now started collecting data on ethnic background as well. You can look at data about donor eggs and egg freeze, and so I'd be remiss if I let you finish today without talking about egg freeze. Now, everybody out there knows that my big conversation about egg freeze when I tell people is, remember, everyone can freeze an egg, but not everybody can thaw an egg. And so when you talk about egg freezing as a patient or a prospective patient, it's very important to know things about the laboratory. So, Dr. Carol, if I were your daughter sitting here, or your sister right now, wanting to freeze my eggs, what would you want me to ask a clinic about their laboratory?
Yeah, so that is a great question. And I think one of the things you can ask is if there are any embryologists who have been DEB certified. So DEB is the donor egg bank. And the donor egg bank has requirements for you to, in the lab, to go get training and then to continually prove that you can thaw their eggs. And so, I'm not saying that the patient is going to have donor eggs, but when you are DEB, when there are people there who are DEB certified, they are actually transmitting that knowledge to all the other embryologists in the group. So it's a good question to ask, but it doesn't necessarily mean that, that's not the end all and be all. Right. But the more that somebody does a protocol, the better they are with it. So how many thaws that clinic has done And even down to, the embryologist level, you want somebody with a lot of experience who is flying. And yeah, I mean, so those are just some of the things. It's just looking at sheer numbers, and then also kind of, maybe inquiring about any specialized training that anybody has to thaw eggs.
Yeah.
So luckily, the protocol now that we use, the vitrification protocol, so that's where we replace all of the water inside of a cell with a cryoprotectant and then freeze it at incredibly low temperatures, less than negative 180. It actually doesn't allow any ice crystals to form inside the cell. It brings the liquid inside of a cell directly to a glass-like state, which is why we call it vitrification. And that protocol now is incredibly robust. So there is a lot more wiggle room these days.
Yeah.
Another good thing to think about too is how the embryos and the eggs and the tissues are stored. So the fluctuation of the temperature inside of the liquid nitrogen dewar, it has to be very tightly controlled. So how people are doing their cryo storage, if it's on site, are they using good alarm systems?
Correct.
Good, modern day protocols where you're checking the level of liquid nitrogen every other day and putting eyes on the tank every single day. All of those things are kind of important for the quality later on.
Those things are so important that many people don't know how critical that can be for long-term storage. I joke because we have multiple alarm systems in our laboratory. And, I sometimes joke that the alarm likes to spaz in that it likes to alarm for the slightest thing. And it always likes to do it at 2 a.m.
Always.
When, there are 5 people from my clinic, myself included, who gets an alarm that your phone starts going crazy with, that somebody has to address, because it's designed to ensure that we always have a certain amount of liquid nitrogen, the levels are a certain way. You're very correct. There's
2 new alarm systems out that I'm super excited about. One of them is an infrared camera that scans the whole room. And it can detect any time the air temperature drops around the liquid nitrogen dewars. So it can look from afar at the whole room. Now, that's not going to help if somebody just has forgotten to fill the liquid nitrogen time and time again. That's only going to help if there's like a catastrophic failure. Or the dewars we use inside the lab, they're very similar to coffee mugs, vacuum coffee mugs. There is a double layer with a vacuum around it, and that is what keeps the temperature very cold inside. So what we worry about the most is that vacuum breaking. But the other thing is, sometimes the alarm systems, like you said, they can be very temperamental. They can be pushed in their setting limit so that they don't alarm at the slightest.
But we don't really want that.
But then when that happens, you are you're increasing the risk that something can happen and go undetected. And the biggest fear is that there's going to be some tank shoved in a corner or in a back room that somebody forgets to fill. And the liquid nitrogen level inside of a tank goes down by about that much every 2 days. So you very quickly can get to a point where the samples are compromised. So the other system that I love that's out right now is a system that actually goes underneath the dewar and measures the actual weight of the liquid nitrogen. Liquid nitrogen is actually very heavy, and it makes the dewars, the dewars are weigh a lot already, but when they're full, you can really detect when the liquid nitrogen is evaporating that much by the weight of the dewar. So I think all those systems combined, good alarms with good sensitivity, but not too much sensitivity that you start ignoring it. The infrared, and then there's also some new pushes toward really specialized specimen management, where sometimes patients are a little nervous to send their samples off site to these, big specimen farms. All the samples are combined, but really that technology is coming from the National Institutes of Health. It's what they use to do their sample storage and management. Very, very highly vetted and very, technology that's been used for a long time and is a best practice.
True.
So I think we're going to start seeing less samples just being stored on site and having that responsibility within the clinic of not only like, I have to make all your embryos, but now I also have to be, the arbiter of the environment that they're kept in for the rest of their useful lives, that it's, potentially it's better done somewhere else where they are
that's always
for that. Yes. Yeah.
So my final question for you today, related to innovation, Dr. Carroll, is thinking about the disparities that we have in terms of access to fertility services, particularly assisted reproductive technologies, not just in the United States, but in other parts of the world. Where do you see the field going in bridging that disparity? Or what would be the top 2 things that maybe we in just a general public need to start looking out for and asking? It was triggered because I just saw someone comment, which happens to be someone who's been reaching out to me talking about, well, how do you make infertility treatment more mobile, especially for communities where they may not have the funds and the access to all the facilities that we tend to create here in the US. Where do you see that?
It's, the model that has come out recently over the past few years is the kind body model.
Yes.
Where they started focusing on fertility preservation, but they took the concept of a food truck, or like, you see like a library book truck that goes into a neighborhood to give access to books.
When I was growing up, that's how when of us got books at school. The trucks came to the school, the library truck. Yes.
Absolutely. And you keep the quality high, but you really bring it into the communities that need it. And there was actually a fabulous talk at ASRM this year about bringing infertility medicine into a resource, poorer country in Africa. And Dr. Catherine Rakowski, who's the current president of ASRM, was involved in that effort to, I thought it was fascinating what she said, that they were looking for equipment here that was gently used, but the quality had to be top notch, even though it was used equipment, because they wanted all of the protocols and everything that they were bringing into that clinic to be the same quality that you would get here in, the US. And so I do think, as we start to realize more and more that population, management and family planning are, they are 2 sides of the same coin.
Correct.
And when you can plan your family the way that your family needs it, it is better for everyone.
True.
Yes. And, I was so riveted by that talk because what she was talking about a little bit was, in some cultures, there is no such thing as male infertility. It was taken care of by the husband's brothers, and nobody talks about it. It literally doesn't exist. There are still a lot of places in the world where having a period or menstruating is very taboo.
Yes.
And there's just, there's Costa Rica, for example. You think this is a country that is, very advanced in everything, but they recently just had IVF legalized there. So
for the first time.
Yes. So we need to bring our protocols and training, skills, knowledge, and our equipment. And so that's also, it's interesting that you bring that up, because that's also one of the things for my app and my platform, is that there are a lot of EMR and LIMS systems here in the US, but they cost about, $40,000 a year for a clinic.
Right. And so that's $40,000 US, which in some countries, that is just a tremendous amount to spend for
small IVF labs here that only have one physician.
Yes.
And then your patients don't end up getting, the best
True.
care in the end, because the information management is kind of all over the board, maybe. And so, we are really trying to focus on not being the Mercedes-Benz, but being like the Honda Civic of the software world, right? We want everybody to be able to afford that top quality product.
Exactly.
And we've even given our system away for free. I mean, if you're I'm the CEO and founder, so I can do that. But, I've had clinics come to me and say, like, our clinic is in trouble financially.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
Can you help them?
You bring up a good point there, because I know a lot of people look at the world of fertility and they look at what they're paying out of pocket for services, and they're probably thinking these people are just pocketing it and living the good life. But it's actually a specialty that has a very, very high overhead. Very high overhead, with the laboratory driving those overhead costs.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, I mean, it's what can you do? The vendors are the ones charging money for that. I'll tell you, it's not in embryologist salaries. It's
that's what I really
general,
It's important that patients hear that, though, because the fancy incubators that we just talked about, and the fancy microscopes to be able to see down to the level of sperm, so that you can. I love your thing, which is the DNA rocket into the egg. That costs a lot of money.
A single ICSI needle can cost $20 alone, because it's a very, specialized type of glass that's been cleaned, sterilized, and it has to come with a lot of packaging, because the tip of that needle is so fine to penetrate the membrane of the egg. You can't see it with the naked eye.
No, you can't.
And so to get something like that from the manufacturing facility where it's made and into my hands without anything happening to that needle, this this piece of glass, it's about as fine as like a baby hair.
Correct.
So it's like, how do you get a piece of glass that fine into a lab? It costs a lot of money.
It costs a lot of money, and you're having to use one for every time you do the injection.
Absolutely, yes.
Somebody might say, "Oh, $20, that's not bad." Well, multiply 20 by the hundreds and thousands of cycles every clinic has to do per year, and suddenly you're getting the scope. And that's just the needle. It's not the media or the fluid thing we're growing in. Someone asked, the process for freezing sperm, is it the same as freezing eggs? He says, I know nothing in science. This is all foreign.
It's a great question. It is similar, but it's so with sperm, the sperm have a very high surface area to volume ratio and very low moisture level inside of the sperm. So we actually use a different kind of product. It's not a vitrification, but it's more of like you are thinking, like, think about an egg yolk.
Yes.
The media is actually called test yolk buffer. What you want to do is coat the outside of that sperm with cryoprotectants and with proteins that protect it in the freezing process. Yeah. So it's a little bit the same, but it's like we don't have to draw all the water out from inside each sperm cell. And that makes the whole freezing process definitely more, it's hardier. They can withstand. And it's a much bigger volume too. So when we freeze the embryo, we're freezing it in a droplet of liquid that is so small you can just barely see it with your naked eye. So if that warms up for even a second, that embryo is toast. Yeah. But with sperm, you can take the vials out of the liquid nitrogen, and it's a very high volume of liquid that's being frozen. So you can hold it in the air for 5 seconds and nothing is going to happen. Yeah, so that makes a huge difference.
This has been just an amazing conversation, and I'd love for us to continue this at another time, because I know the audience is going to have more questions for you. I hope you consider coming back, because, oh boy, there's a lot for us to talk about.
What do they want me to write my next blog post about for your blog? Let's do that.
Nice.
Give me some suggestions.
Dr. Carol should be about. Yes, indeed. I love that. So as you can see, Dr. Carol talks about so much. She's well versed in so many things, including social justice as it relates to the field of medicine and science. She talks about gender equity and ways to make gender equity a reality when it comes to the role of science and technology. And, as most of you out there know, many girls lose their interest in science, technology, engineering, and math by age 14. It doesn't matter how much they were excelling. Along the way, they lose their interest because actually of a lot of perceived microaggressions that are sent toward their way as they come along in science, whether it be just taunting, teasing, or opportunities not being available to them. And so Dr. Carol, like myself, does a lot of work in that arena and just emphasizing the benefit of having everyone represented in the fields. And so, she can talk about that. Obviously, she can tell you any and everything about the laboratory. And I feel like at the same time, for us in the general public, most people aren't aware of what really goes on behind the scenes when it comes to reproduction. And also, as you can hear, she talks about AI and innovation in reproduction. And so, tell us what you'd like to hear her talk about or in the blog. So Roberts Wendell Dexter is saying gender equity. He wants to hear more about gender equity in reproduction. So there we go, Dr. Carol. We've got one there. I'm sure there'll be more. And certainly we'll come back here and we'll keep talking. We'll talk more about ART Compass because that is so important. And I love that you're using it to help democratize even the way we deliver laboratory services. And so Kelly Stewart is saying that this has been a masterclass. She's commenting from Twitter. So this is awesome because right now we are streaming across Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube. And so Jamila Jacobson says reproduction brings about lives. Indeed. And, there's some really interesting statistics coming out. For example, in the Western world, a recent paper published in the Lancet Journal suggested that if we don't change how we're approaching reproduction, most of our Western countries will not be able to replace their current populations by the year 2070. So we have a crisis on our hands if we're not talking about how to solve the infertility issue that 16% of people are facing when it comes to couples, and 1 in 8 if you just conservatively look across all human beings. So it's a big deal. Dr. Carol, thank you so much. Do you have any closing statements, Dr. Carol?
Well, so I do want to say that it has been such an honor to come on your show and talk about all of these various topics with you. You're such a giant in the field of medicine and obviously a role model and mentor. And it's so good to see somebody, women of color really succeeding, and it's big shoes to fill and follow. And just thank you so much for having me. And I'm relatively new in the social media space, so I've only been doing this for the past few years. So there's definitely a lot of room. Right now our Instagram site is a patient-centered community. Yes. You can join us there. It's Art Compass IVF. Mm-hmm. And right now we're focused on education, inspiration, and resources. But I'm, always looking for more ways to impact patients and bring really the science of reproductive medicine and sort of demystify it and bring it to the people, because education is empowerment, It is. A lot of times education is politicized, like who can know what. Shockingly is politicized, right?
And now it's too politicized because people are unfortunately making some really bad decisions that will negatively impact their own personal health and circles without realizing that they're simply yielding to a political will that's not exactly in their best health interest. So, oh my goodness, that is so true. So true. So you are on Instagram?
Yeah, we're on Instagram. Our community on Twitter, it's pretty small. Our Facebook group is mostly for embryologists and professionals in the field, and our Instagram is mainly for patients and people who are interested in science. Yeah. But I do want to mention too that I'm so lucky that I have been asked to turn my manuscript into a book, and the book is called The Thin Pink Line.
The Thin Pink Line, yes.
And we're talking about all of the different ways that reproduction is regulated and issues about, access to care, consent in medicine. We talk about things like educational pelvic exams and how those are performed, and something called the husband stitch, and also hysteroscopies and pain management, and just a whole spectrum of everything that has to do with reproductive care.
Yes.
And so that book will be hopefully coming out next year.
The thin
2021.
Be looking for it.
As if I didn't have enough on my plate.
You know what? I think that's another thing that you discover as you grow in this field. And for those who are listening, who are the parents of young women out there who are interested in science, is yes, there's a point where it looks like it's all famine, meaning, oh my God, she's working so hard, nothing's coming from it. Is she ever going to have a life? Will people know she's working hard? And then you get into your field and you really start growing your name, your brand, etc., and people find you. They will find you. And so, yes, opportunities keep coming. I say take as many as you can because this is your season, Dr. Carol. That said, of course, how do you learn to say no? Because I guess we should talk about when you do have to say no.
That's a topic for another day.
Instead of spreading yourself too thin. But, you know, I think you're a huge shining light and your beacon has to be seen because you are making a huge difference. And I love that we get to show people that, you know, it's not just us physicians who are out there feeling passionate about this field and about the role our field plays in the life of humanity. But it's happening in the laboratory too. We've got, you know, at my clinic, we've got Yelena and Dr. Passman, and she's out there like, woo, you know, people are passionate about this stuff and it's not about the money. If you notice, none of what we talked about involved money. It's information, education, transparency, empowerment. That's what this is about.
Absolutely. So,
well, thank you so much for coming, Dr. Carol. Guys, check out the blog on the Dr. Cindy website. It's called 5 Health and Wellness Tips for the Person Who is Trying to Conceive. The contact information for Dr. Carol is also included there. Dr. Carol will be writing more blogs, so we'll do one on gender equity for sure, and we've got so much more to come. Thank you so much, everybody. We spent an hour and 21 minutes with you today because Dr. Carol is such a treasure, and I look forward to seeing everybody in next week. Next week we'll be here with 2 patients talking about their unique journeys and how they made their decision, including talking about preterm birth. So until then, take care, everybody. Bye. Stay there, Dr. Carol. We'll debrief.